So I will officially welcome you all, along with my great blue heron, who has come to our Synod Assembly often for the Green Faith Team's table, and with water and bird and whale, we gather together with all creatures that need water, as well as all of us humans all around the world. And we are grateful to be together. I'm Pastor Peg Schultz-Ackerson, and I serve at Lutheran Church of the Master in West Los Angeles. And I delight to welcome you all. In 1993, the United Nations designated March 22nd as World Water Day in response to the vital need for sustainable fresh water all over the world. And World Water Day has been observed now in many countries for these 29 years. And we here in the Southwest California, as well as all the California synods, have observed World Water Day for the past 7 years at least. So we're grateful for that. And we have a wonderful program in store for all of us today at this noon hour. So thank you for being with us. And we have speakers who are present here with us on the Zoom, as well as a few very moving brief videos from ministries among us. So again, a watery welcome to all of you from our hosts, the Southwest California Synod and the Green Faith Team and the Hunger Team of the Sierra Pacific Synod. We all welcome you, and I give thanks to each person who has worked so hard to bring today together. So thank you for having us muted, Bishop. And now we have a land acknowledgement from Jane Afonso.
Yes, and we're very grateful to Pastor Caleb Craner from St. Andrews in West LA for sharing this land acknowledgement with us. We gather as witnesses of history and witnesses of the world in which we live. It's important for us to acknowledge the oppression of the people who originally lived here so that we can move beyond performative action and into true solidarity. The land on which we gather today is the ancestral homeland of the Gabrielino, Tongva, Kizh, and Chumash peoples. We witness the past, we witness ongoing cruelty, and with God's help, we will witness reformation.
Thank you, Jane. And it is now my wonderful pleasure and honor to welcome Ruth Ivory Moore. Ruth is the Director for Environmental and Corporate Social Responsibility, which is a part of the Witness and Society Unit of the ELCA. And Ruth will bring greetings to us from Washington, D.C., where she's zooming in from, and from her important environmental work. Welcome, Ruth.
Thank you, Pastor Peg, and thank you, Jane and Scott, for inviting me today. I really do appreciate that. First, I'd just like to give you a brief reading from a social statement, Church and Society, a Lutheran perspective. Then I'll just give you a really short version of some of the priorities we're working on in the environmental and climate world and CSR world. Every public policy has an effect on us and on our neighbors, even neighbors living across the country and around the world. This compels us as church to unite realism and wisdom, vision, and courage in its social responsibility. It needs constantly to discern when to support and when to confront society's cultural patterns and powers. And this is so appropriate today because as the theme for World Water Day is relating to the groundwater which is sustained, which is a part of a cycle, but it is impacted by so many things that are happening with us today, from climate change to just general pollution. So I just want to give you a little bit of a highlight of some of the priorities that I'm working on as part of the environmental work in Witness to Society. Creation care. We're working to advance policies geared toward bridging ideologies while addressing the impacts of environmental degradation We're advocating for comprehensive energy, greenhouse gas emission mitigation, and adaptation legislation and policies for reaching carbon neutrality. We are also working to promote policy to provide the needed transfer of technology and for international climate finance. The recent IPCC Intergovernmental Panel report on climate change showed us that we're in a dire situation regarding climate change, but time is not on our side, but we do have time to work this if we start implementing measures now. We're also working to promote environmental justice and other legislative policies that address the interconnectivity between environmental, economic, social issues that advance strategies for remedying and eliminating systemic biases and injustice that impact vulnerable communities. In addition to that, we wrap this up by embracing sustainability policies. We're looking to advance policy and legislation that call for a better quality of life today without shortcoming future generations. This includes legislation promoting transitions away from fossil fuels, such as tax credits, and regulations mandate industrial facilities reduce air, water, and soil pollution. We promote innovation, conservation practices, rural and agriculture sustainable measures, the Farm Bill. So we're glad to be here today, and on behalf of the ELCA's Witnesses Society group, thank you for inviting me, and I look forward to this program today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ruth, for your wonderful leadership among us. We're so grateful for the work you're doing. Thank you, Ruth. Now we're going to watch just a short video about what drought means to agricultural workers from the tri-lingual Church of Iglesia Luterana Santa Cruz in Santa Maria, California. It's a part of the Southwest California Synod. It's primarily comprised of indigenous Mistecos from Oaxaca, Mexico. We say a thanks especially to Pastor Esteban Salazar and family for help with this video. It's just 3 minutes, so enjoy this video now.
Entonces, ¿qué tanto les afecta el que no haya agua? ¿Qué tanto afecta que no haya agua? En los campos. Afecta mucho. ¿En qué les afecta a ustedes? En todas las necesidades. Venga, don Tino, por favor. En todas las necesidades. Por ejemplo, ¿qué necesidades? Venga, don Tino, venga, señor, venga. ¿En qué les afecta el agua? Que no hay agua. Estas familias nos van a decir en qué les afecta a ustedes. Aquí parece, tantito. ¿En qué les afecta que no haya agua?
Pues si no hay agua, no hay trabajo.
Si no hay agua, no hay trabajo.
No hay trabajo, no hay comida.
No hay comida.
No hay trabajo, no hay para la renta.
No hay trabajo, no hay para la renta.
No comida.
No comida. Entonces es importante que haya agua. El agua es importante, ¿verdad? ¿Sí, todos? El agua es importante. Bien. Entonces, ¿qué vamos a decir nosotros? Tenemos que darles a conocer que el agua es muy importante para nosotros. Entonces, este video pequeño se subió para que nosotros lo mandemos. Entonces, ¿en qué más otra cosa perjudica el agua, jóvenes?
Si no hay agua, tu cuerpo no funciona.
¿Escucharon algo importante? Si no hay agua, tu cuerpo se enferma, no funciona. ¿Qué más? Si no hay agua, ¿qué?
No hay vida.
No hay vida, no nos bañamos, todos vamos a andar todos, ¿verdad? Que no nos gusta, ¿verdad? ¿Cuál sería la solución para que hubiera agua? ¿Cuál es la solución? ¿Cómo la hacemos? Ustedes díganme.
Con agua va a haber más trabajo, más vida, más...
Pues con agua va a haber más trabajo, más vida.
¿Qué pasa con sus cosechas si no hay agua porque no llovió?
Se secan. ¿Sí?
Se secan.
Nos estaban diciendo, no sé si alguien ha ido por allá por el aeropuerto, dicen que está secando la fresa y no sé qué otro.
¿Brócoli?
El brócoli, parece que estaban secando porque no hay agua. Entonces la importancia del agua, ¿verdad? La importancia del agua. Bien, muchísimas gracias a todos. Otra vez un aplauso para todos.
Thank you for that. And now we will hear God's gracious word to us from our scripture text for this day, which is from Revelation 22, and it will be read in English and Mandarin, and then we have a very brief reading of it from Spanish by Claudio Gladicia. And it's very brief, wonderful reading from the Word of God.
So I think we begin with Vicar Evangeline Day.
Reading from Revelation. Then the angel showed me the river of the water of life, bright as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb, through the middle of the street of the city. On either side of the river is the tree of life. 天使又让我看一道生命水的河，明亮如水晶，从上帝和羔羊的宝座流出来，经过城内街道的中央，在河的两边有生命树。Word of God, word of life.
Luego el ángel me mostró un río de agua de vida, claro como el cristal que salía del trono de Dios, del Cordero, y corría por el centro de la calle principal de la ciudad. A cada lado del río estaba el árbol de la vida.
Word of God, word of life. I invite you to keep that verse with you throughout this World Water Day, Revelation 22, verse 2. It's now my honor again to introduce to us the speakers for our keynote today. Reverend Dr. Daniel R. Smith holds a master's degree from Pacific Lutheran Theological Seminary and a Master of Divinity from there, and an MA and PhD from the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley. His doctoral dissertation was on a Lutheran theology of nature, and his work in ministry, teaching, and academic publishing has primarily attempted to make a theological case for climate action. He serves as pastor of Lutheran Church of the Incarnation in Davis, California, and is an adjunct professor at Pacific Lutheran Theological Seminary. Thank you for being with us, Reverend Dr. Daniel Smith. We also have with him, Peter Moyle is a distinguished professor emeritus at the University of California, Davis. Professor Moyle has worked through UC Davis on fish biology and water problems for over 50 years. He's currently the Associate Director of the Center for Watershed Sciences in Davis. Thank you to Peter Moyle for being with us. So a scientist and a theologian in conversation.
Thank you so much, Peg. It's wonderful to be here with you and to see so many smiling and familiar faces, and to see some new faces as well. I'm going to share a screen now. Can everyone hear me okay? Thumbs up. Good. We have some slides to share as a presentation about the Pewter Creek watershed. So we're going to start this slideshow here. Hopefully this works. Remarks, and we're going to kind of go back and forth, and this will be a living conversation of science and theology.
I hope so. I hope so. Sounds very good to me.
All right, so here we go. All life depends on water, as we well know. We need it to drink and bathe, as we heard in the video clip earlier. The future of humanity depends on good stewardship, on managing that which is in our care well. This includes, of course, addressing threats to the environment like climate change, even and especially also as people of faith, as scientists, and as people of goodwill. And to treat water as a resource that belongs to everyone, shared with wetlands, streams, lakes, and the ecosystems they support. We need to do this because ultimately, actually, it's good for us as a species, but also because it's the right thing to do. Water management is also local and personal. California is a prime illustration. Droughts are severe and frequent, all the more so now with the acceleration of climate change. This has caused us, at times at least, to respond in a mentality of scarcity, unfortunately. Every river is dammed in our state to conserve water, mostly for farming, but also for urban areas. And citizens sometimes act as if every drop of water has someone's name on it. But in fact, really, most all water is actually owned and allocated by the state. So we're going to talk about
Peter Creek.
That's a reconciled ecosystem.
And I'd like to say the legal doctrine, the legal framework that Dan was talking about is called the public trust doctrine. And it's a very, very interesting one because it's a a moral and philosophical concept that goes back to the Roman Emperor Justinian in about 500 AD. So it's been around for a while. The fact it survived as long tells you something about its importance.
Yeah.
It basically says that rivers and similar resources cannot be owned by individuals, but that the state holds them in trust for the public good. And this includes providing water for the environment. This has been largely ignored until fairly recently. Today, we understand that the public trust also applies to creatures and ecosystems that support them. And this is where the case for Pewter Creek is so important. So why is Pewter Creek so important? Well, first of all, let's look at a little history. You go back 500 years, this is what it would have looked like. And this is the reach that's on the valley floor going up into the Coast Range. This is a tributary to the Sacramento River.
Oh, marvelous.
Think of what it's supposed to have been like. Such a rich for the native peoples who lived here, as well as rich for the animals, and with streams meandering across the landscape. Next slide. Yeah. This is why it's also so important to acknowledge that this land has been the home of the Patwin people, which I will let Dan read the names since he's been practicing.
Yeah. So I like that we had a land acknowledgement earlier, and this is important as well. This land has been the home of Patwin people. Today, there are 3 federally recognized Patwin tribes: Katsudihi Band of Wintun Indians of the Calusa Indian Community, Quetzaldihi Wintun Nation, and the Yocha-Dihi Wintun Nation.
Thank you, Dan.
You're welcome. Get back to this.
And here's Pewter Creek as it is today. It is nothing like the creek that the Wintun people lived along. What you see here is this narrow band of this narrow band of trees meandering across an agricultural landscape. This is some of the best agricultural land in the world. And what you notice that this is how dense the vegetation is along the creek, but it's a very narrow band. The creek came out of the Coast Range, and in the middle of this area was a beautiful valley, the Berryessa Valley, which was accessible by Hell's Gate, which some of you might appreciate the name.
That's right in here.
But this valley was famous for its good farmland and its beauty. Next slide.
You can see that valley right here. This is kind of a picture of the valley.
Yeah, that's an old aerial view of the valley, and this is what it looks like today.
This is what it looks like today.
It's no longer Berryessa Valley, it's Berryessa Reservoir, filled with water.
AKA Lake Berryessa.
So precious to our society.
Peter just educated me. It's not actually a lake.
Yes.
Everyone calls it a lake. It's technically a reservoir.
Yeah, we get spoiled that way.
Well, you can see here the Monticello Dam here in the foreground.
Okay, next slide.
Yeah.
But the creek started being altered as soon as the Anglo and European settlers came into the valley. What you notice here is, again, notice the farmland and the narrow band of trees going down the middle of the middle of the, and the levees on both sides. So the whole landscape was just transformed in a very small number of years.
I'll stop.
That's all right.
Messing you up.
At any rate, go next slide.
Okay.
Just and the important thing is, people, even in the 1940s, periodically there's major flooding would occur along the creek. And even farmland was held up as being important not to flood it. So Monticello Dam was built in 1957. This is a typical California dam. It's built to provide water for the cities and cities of Solano County, as well as the farmland, and for Travis Air Force Base. Next slide. This shows you again a typical way we treat water in California, with a big dam and a reservoir up in the hills, then a dam, then usually a reach below the dam. It's way called the interdam reach. That's cold and often supports good fishing. Then a smaller reservoir to divert the water to send it south, in this case by the Puget South Canal to Solano County. And I want you to notice, though, see that sign that says "To Davis" on the bottom. That's the lower Puget Creek. It's about 27 miles of creek that flows down into the Yolo Bypass.
Puget Creek, and then seeing this.
Puget Creek was an abused stream. The university was mining gravel out of it, keeping it clear. People dumped their trash in the creek. It was lined with old car bodies and refrigerators. Next slide.
Just awful. It's just horrid.
And then on top of this, we'd have periodic droughts. And the drought of 1989 and 90, though, was important because Puget Creek started to dry up. And this led partly to the formation of an environmental group, the Puget Creek Council, where people decided they really wanted to try to make this creek better than it was, turn it into something that was new and different.
Mm-hmm.
Next slide. And this is what they were trying to get away from. This is the way Puget Creek looked.
Is the lowermost reaches, right? Or towards the bottom?
Yeah, towards the bottom. But this is in 1990, in the middle of the drought.
Terrible.
Obviously, not a place you want to have your kids play.
Yeah,
and my kids were like other kids growing up in this area. They really were attracted to the creek when it was flowing. But,
and your wife wasn't real keen on them playing in there, as I don't think you were either.
No, no one was keen.
Right.
Next slide. And the fish died off.
Yeah.
Big fish kills of all sorts. Great for the herons for a short while, but the next slide. Well, this led to a lawsuit. And this is unusual because it involved the Puget Creek Council, this environmental group I talked about, joining with the city of Davis and the University of California. To have UC Davis involved was especially amazing. Mm. And they were suing the Solano County Water Agency. And the basic idea was to get water back in the creek, to make it into a living stream again. Mm. There was a trial in the Sacramento Superior Court in 1996, and then a settlement agreement in the year 2000, where all the parties got together and devised a plan to restore the creek.
And there was some vision behind this, right? Like to have the creek differently than how it had been. We actually want a different waterway than what we have.
That's right. And the vision, this is where the public trust comes in. The vision was to create a stream that was good for people as well as for wildlife and fish and wildlife.
And it wasn't also based on the Fish and Game Code? You told me that at one point.
Yeah, the public trust was the public trust doctrine was, in this case, was largely implemented through a law that had been on the books since the late 19th century that was, anyway, this law had been around, section 5937 of the Fish and Game Code. It's been around for a long time and ignored. Next question.
Yeah.
Next
slide.
Next slide.
Yeah, next. Here
well,
we go.
The lawsuit was successful, much to everybody's surprise. Mm. And the Puget Creek was, and the basis for this was that this creek was a public trust resource that belonged to the people, not just to the water agency. Mm-hmm. And it was a great day of celebration in Davis and amongst us working on the creek.
Yeah, those of us that really care about the critters, as you've told me before many times. Okay.
The nice thing about this was that when this Puget Creek was signed not only by the Puget Creek Council, the city of Davis, and
the university, right?
And the university, but it was signed by the Solano Water Agency, the people who'd been sued. Now had a 180-degree turn and became one of the stronger proponents of a living stream.
Because it actually benefited people, right?
Because it benefited people, yes.
Yeah.
And they found that they could spare the water if they managed it correctly or in a good way. It was quite astonishing.
Yeah.
And that's made a huge difference. Next slide.
Yeah.
So the creek today, especially during wet years, looks like this. You can canoe down it. It's a beautiful stream. Next slide.
This.
And this is a slide Dan just took a short while ago.
2 days ago.
Well, I'll talk a little bit about it.
Tell me what you see as a scientist.
But this is the way I had always imagined the creek, which was a clear flowing water with clean gravel in the bottom. And this water comes right out of Lake Berryessa. So it's a nice, clean, fresh water. This is water that people can play in. It's water, it's good for wildlife. You notice how the vegetation comes up along the creek. We now have a riparian forest where, when I first moved to Davis in the early 1970s, there wasn't, one did not exist. Yeah. So a lot of this vegetation was self-restoring. Next slide. Or do you want to talk about your?
Well, yeah, I mean, I just would say that this has been, Peter has led, just so you all know, I've invited Peter, and he's done this too with the folks in the congregation, walks and talks, like with our confirmation class and with folks. We've had other environmental education, and he's shared this story for folks to really get to know this little corner of God's creation, where we live, our watershed, and why it's healthy now, and the work that he's done, and how we can learn through nature something about ourselves and God, and our faith and our spirituality, which is really powerful. And we have.
Well, I'm a fish biologist, so my goal initially getting involved in all this was to bring back the native fish, and that's indeed what this has done. I had the great honor to be an expert witness on the trial, and to design a flow regime that was good for native fish. You can't just let water down the stream and expect it to recover. You've got to do it in a way that makes scientific sense using the ability of the Solano Water Agency, their willingness after the lawsuit to share water with the lower creek, and for the water agency to become a proponent of so many good things, was really one of the best things that happened out of this, where people really started cooperating and working together from so many different sectors of the environment. And one of the good things that really sort of unexpected was the salmon runs returned to the creek. Not very big ones, but a couple hundred fish each year. And that was enormously attractive to people. Suddenly you could stand on a bridge in winters and look down and watch salmon spawning. That was unprecedented in the creek. Next slide. Okay, if we can work this out. And here's an underwater photo of one of our beautiful 20-pound salmon spawning in the creek. Notice how clear the water is. It's really a high quality system now. Next slide.
So, as I took the picture a few days ago. That salmon is just majestic. And what I wanted to share was, I mentioned that we've had classes there. The riparian reserve is also used for recreation by a variety of species, including, this is my family. This is my son, Jacob, my wife, Neela, and that's our 5-month-old puppy, Rocky. We were just there. Especially during the pandemic, we would go there. I mean, this was therapy for us to be able to go on little hikes and walks like this along the water and just enjoy nature. I mean, really special. For environmental education, Rocky is supposed to be a water dog.
And this was actually the reason the university joined the lawsuit, because a bunch of us faculty convinced them that the Pewter Creek was an important source of education for the students at UC Davis and in the high schools. So it was it's a very real part of the salvation of the creek.
Yeah, and some time for play. So Rocky trying to figure this out.
So what we have here is a novel ecosystem, which means it's like many ecosystems in California, it bears only a superficial resemblance to the historic system that was there, because this creek is deeply channeled into the surrounding farmland. But it supports a huge array of native birds and fish and people. When I go out there, I'm expecting to see otters and mink and things of this nature, as well as beaver if you're out there in the evening. But the important thing about this ecosystem, it's a mixture of native and non-native species, and it's controlled, totally managed by people. If we weren't out there working in it, managing it, it would become something, it would degrade to a much different system that we did not like as much. So this is a good example of where human presence is responsible for bringing back, creating a system that is much better than what was there 10 or 20 years ago.
Good.
Next slide.
Well, next slide this is our sanctuary renovation at Lutheran Church of the Incarnation in Davis. And you can see a sort of similarity to the undulations of the river. We're just started, it's in process right now. And we're trying to, and we have a floor artist, his name is Mike Miller, he calls himself the concretist, to create a sense of place, which is different from space, I would argue, that we are creatures of our Pewter Creek watershed. You know, we're earth creatures breathe with spirit as well. That we stay in dialogue with science as a scientific, community in the university across the street, literally, on behalf of the community of all creation. And that's who we are as God's people in Christ. We're also creatures of nature. So that's a reminder. This is another view from the other direction. There's a sense of the colors of sort of the landscape in the Central Valley of where we live. It's a river of life theme. Really, every river is a river of life. But it's a biblical and scriptural theological theme as well, and to support our stewardship, which we do together in dialogue with our science partners and so forth. Oh, just a couple of items just I wanted to share about our congregation. We're a Green Faith congregation. We joined Green Faith back in 2014. We won an energy efficiency award from California Interfaith Power and Light in 2015 for a renovation project we did where we increased our energy efficiency. And our focus, this is a big part of my preaching and teaching, and really our ministry, is the healing of earth and all her creatures. And then this is interesting. When we had knocked down a wall moving into our sanctuary, and we could not get rid of this post. And we just kind of fretted about, at least I did, fretted and worried about what are we going to do? And sort of like, well, if you can't defeat it, own it. And these posts really are tree trunks. So the concrete artist worked with us. And every time I look at this post, especially now that this river, and this has only happened in the last few weeks that this has actually been painted on the floor, I think of Psalm 1. Happy are those who delight in Torah, in the law of the Lord. They are like trees planted by streams of water, who yield their fruit in due season and whose leaves do not wither. In all they do, they prosper, from Psalm 1. The text from Jeremiah 17 actually came up in the lectionary a few weeks ago while these floor artists were actually doing this painting, which I kind of couldn't believe. I promise it was not timed that way. It was like a spirit thing. It was really amazing.
And Psalm 1 is actually a pretty good description of Pewter Creek.
It kind of is. And Jeremiah 17 even says that there are trees planted by water whose roots reach out towards the stream. It's something else. So, and then we have this river of life and tree of life theme. And I looked and I saw the river of life flowing through the New Jerusalem and the tree of life on either side with its 12 kinds of. So I'll kind of leave it at that. I mean, really what we, in the Christian tradition, we have a tree of life, and I preach this a lot, a tree of life in Genesis, a tree of life in Revelation. And for us, theologically speaking, the tree of life is the cross, where the healing of earth and all her creatures sort of begins from a theological perspective. But
thank you,
welcome,
Dr. Reverend Dan and Professor Peter. We're so grateful for your words and your patience working through this, and that we would all be fruitful like that, and that your beautiful floor in your church gives testimony to. Thank you. Thank you for that. And we are so grateful for your presence. And I now like to welcome Pastor Amy Beveridge. She's pastor at Bethel Lutheran in Templeton, California, which is in the Southwest California Synod. And Amy will introduce two brief videos that are really wonderful. So Pastor Amy.
Yeah, hi, everybody. The Central Coast Conference is to give you where we are on the map. We start in Solvang, California. We run right up through the Salinas River Valley and come to here in Templeton. And all of our economies have towns that depend on healthy land, open spaces and tourism, the growing season for farmers and ranchers. We have a long history connected to small independent landowners. And all of us feel very indebted to their stewardship of the land. Their preservation efforts have really created a sense of place. When you're talking of sense of place, our farmers and ranchers have done a lot for us in that way. We owe our historic character of our town and even our small cities to them. So I'm going to share a recorded conversation with one of our ranchers who's a member of our church so that you can get a sense of how the drought, and she talks about her watershed and how that's been affected, and especially for her work and her family vocation. And then we also have a video from an olive grower in Northern California, a voice all the way from Shasta County. So thank you to all of you for caring about these crucial issues. We feel them every day here in the Central Coast. So tell me, how many generations have been on your ranch here in Central California?
My grandchildren are the sixth generation.
Sixth generation.
And they're, my youngest ones help the most, actually. 5, 6, 7, 8, 4 little boys, and they can bring in the herd.
That's amazing.
They're doing really well. They love the ranch.
Yeah.
Well, we're in, even though we got 27 inches of rain this year, we're still, we consider that drought. Mm-hmm. I have multiple stock ponds which fill up from the rain, and they can feed water to the cattle for most of the year. I mean, through the summer. And the creeks will dry up, but there's pools in the creek. With only, 21 inches the year before, 27 inches this year so far, they're not sustainable. Mm-hmm. At the same time, our troughs are filled from a natural spring. It is still running well, but we have to pump the water from the spring up to the top hills. It's a process, and then gravity flows down to all the different areas, pastures that are closer to the homestead, where we have water troughs. So we're pumping about every other day, sometimes every 2 days now.
Yeah.
Because the natural water of the stock ponds and the creek are pretty low. I think we had 42 calves that we worked last month, and we have 50 plus cows, their mothers plus some heifers and a bull, and we probably will go down to about 12 cows. And that's the other thing, with lack of rain, there's lack of people growing hay.
Yeah.
The amount that I paid for feed to store in my barn this year was astronomical. And when all is said and done, you really aren't making any money. Mm-hmm. On 50 cows, 42 calves, you're not making a lot of money.
And it can be very quickly, and we've seen in certain parts of our town, which has only a town of 10,000 but a huge amount of land, it can get converted to grapes. That's because a lot of people come here to ooh, I'm going to do that dream of having a vineyard. What takes more water, cows or grapes? Do you know?
My son is in the wine industry, his career, and he actually sells French wine barrels. But anyway, he said it's not really the vineyard that uses excessive amounts of water. It's the tasting rooms there and the making the wine itself.
Yeah.
And the tasting rooms with constant dishwashers going and that. But just to have the vines on the ground, I mean, this used to be a huge nut region. Walnut and almonds were huge here. And they had drip systems, until they were well established, but we also had more natural rain back then. I mean,
Right.
we are feeling the effects
Yeah.
of the climate is changing. They happen to have their ranch on top of an underground river that flows into the Salinas River. And they have never been out of water. And they are very, very generous during the big drought. We would put a 300 gallon receptacle on the back of my pickup truck, and I would drive the 3 miles to their place, and they had a hose bib at their gate, and they would allow myself and other neighbors to fill up 300 gallons at a time and take back and put it in our troughs. We weren't doing it for drinking water at that point. We were just trying to keep our animals hydrated.
Hi, this is Elizabeth Betancourt. With my husband, I own a small farm up in Shasta County. We grow olives, and we have a market garden and some pear trees like you see behind me here. The drought last year really did a number on our farm as well as those around us. It made it so that we produced 0 olives, and our ability to produce produce, fruits and vegetables for our community was severely hampered. In fact, we let almost half of our garden go fallow. Drought means that it makes it harder for California farmers to respond to climate change. A lot of what we do as far as making sure our soil health and tilth is there, and water holding capacity, and all of the worms and the biome in the soil, that requires water. And so when we have nothing, that means we can't do our climate work as well as not being able to produce food. So we're hoping for a better year this year. Our district is certainly better prepared this year, even though we still have 0 water from the Bureau. But it is important when we talk about water allocation to think about everybody up and down the state and all of the services we depend on as Californians. It's easy to get really focused on city allocations and watering your home and maybe losing your garden. But remember, the food you eat, by and large, comes from California as well. And it has a smaller climate footprint when you buy local food. So it's really important as we move into our climate-altered future to ensure that California's farmers are part of the conversation. And in particular, I want to point out our small farmers should be part of that conversation. Our ability to be nimble and produce regionally specific food, culturally appropriate foods, as well as with a very small carbon footprint, is incredibly important and will ensure that California remains nimble in our response to climate change in the future. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Pastor Amy, for introducing those 2 videos, and we give thanks for both of the communities that provided those gifts to us today. And we now invite Bishop Brenda, if she would please lead us in a thanksgiving for baptism, as we've acknowledged the complexity of water all across California, and we give thanks. So Bishop, thank you for leading us.
Thank you. There is a portion of this Thanksgiving for baptism where I would invite you to take the water if you have it with you. It might be a glass, it might be a bowl. And the first thing I'm going to do is something that we don't always do in Thanksgivings for baptism. So you don't start with this. I'll tell you when it happens in the ceremony. But I want to invite you first to take a big drink of water. Because as we understand, water is life and water is a quencher of thirst. And so there will be a portion where I am going to pour water. And when I do that, I invite you to first take a drink of your water and then put your thumb in the water or part of your hand and mark your forehead with the sign of the cross, which is always our way as Christians of remembering our baptism. So let us give thanks for our baptism in a land of drought. When God placed Adam and Eve in Eden, their every need was met. Enough food, enough water, lush gardens, and shade trees. When God led Israel through the wilderness, the people doubted, fearing that there would not be enough water and not enough food. But God brought water from a rock and sent manna from heaven. When God came to earth in the body of Jesus, the waters of the earth were sanctified through Jesus' baptism. The heavens were opened as he came up from the river. The earth's waters participated in the cleansing and blessing of the ministry of our Savior. When Native people settled in Baja California, they chose their homes based on abundant water supplies. Their crops flourished, their families thrived. When white immigrants came to California, they built their cities near waterways and reservoirs. When the rains do not come, the people doubt and despair. We blame each other. We squander our precious water. We lay claim to water, a resource which can only come from God. The same is true of our hope and our salvation. It is a gift which can only come from God. I invite you to drink your water and remember your baptism. We give you thanks, maker of water and rivers and oceans. We give you thanks, quencher of thirst and cleanser of souls, for the gift of baptism, which unites all people of every nation and tongue. We give you thanks for the gift of baptism, your holy sacrament. We give you thanks for the life spring we find in you. Amen.
Thank you, Bishop Brenda. What a beautiful way to call us into giving thanks for our baptism. Thank you so much. I now want to explain a book giveaway we're going to do. Thank you, Pastor Scott Bartlett, for sharing your Thrivent gift this way. So if you can, if anyone has a birthday today, put your name and contact in the chat. And if you've got a birthday today, let us know soon. And you've won one of these books. I don't know, Scott, if you can show us these books, but they're about creation and water and wonderful things. So, and if we don't have someone with a birthday today, we'll get who's closest to today. So if you have a birthday very close to today, put that in the chat. Okay, so husband Rick's birthday is today. Do we have anyone else? So anyway, we'll announce it later, but just put these in the chat and we'll figure it out. We have another book for whoever's baptism birthday is closest to World Water Day. So this is a good reason to know your baptism birthday, as we've just given thanks for baptism. So if you know your baptism birthday and it's today or very near here, put it in the chat and we'll figure it out in the next moment. But right now we have a wonderful piece of music, and this is my whale that's so glad to get to listen to this music that I painted. But this music is provided for us by Pastor Steve Beckham, who is with us on the Zoom. Thank you for being with us, Pastor Steve. And we now listen to Pastor Beckham's music. He serves Gloria Day Lutheran in Long Beach, and a beautiful video music that provided from Pastor Steve's musical gifts. And then we'll announce the book giveaway and then greet one another briefly. So enjoy this beautiful water-based music from Pastor Steve Beckham.
First it comes together in the clouds, then it rains, running down the mountains and the hills to the plains, running in the stream beds and the rivers to the sea, lavishing its liquid life on you and me. Water is the spirit of the earth, cleansing of new birth? What is it worth? To the wheat and corn in Kansas, to the garden in New York, to the creatures of the Everglades, the heron and the stork, to the baby being baptized, to the family in St. Paul, the spirit of the earth was given to us all. Water is the spirit of the earth. Water is the cleansing of new birth. What is it worth? Thirsting flowers in the desert, drinking in their liquid treasure, blooming out to show their pleasure. In their wisdom they were waiting, like a parable relating, spirits die without the raining. First it comes together in the clouds, then it rains, running down the mountains and the hills to the plains, running in the stream beds and the rivers to the sea, lavishing its liquid life on you and me. Water is the spirit of the earth. Water is the cleansing of new birth. What is it worth?